Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, early 1980s. The crack epidemic hasn't fully hit yet, but heroin has been here for years, moving through brownstones, through corner stores, through the hands of men who learned the business from older men who learned it from men before them. Bed-Stuy in the early 1980s is a neighborhood under pressure from every direction. The city has essentially given up on it. Businesses are closing, buildings are abandoned. The unemployment rate in black neighborhoods across New York is running at nearly double the national average. The legitimate economy has one door for young black men in Bed-Stuy, and that door is mostly closed. The other door, the one that doesn't check credentials, is wide open. And on Stuyvesant Avenue at number 67, one man decides to walk through it. He is not a gangster with a name the streets already know. He is not connected to the Italian mob or the Colombians or any of the organizations that run product into New York from the outside. He is a man from the neighborhood with brothers, sisters, cousins, and a childhood friend who has been with him since they were boys, running these same streets. He builds his operation the only way a man with nothing builds anything, from the inside out. Family first, blood before business. The people you trust most are the people who share your name. Within a few years, the brownstone at 67 Stuyvesant Avenue is running product around the clock. Shift workers on the stoop, buyers who know the signal, pit bulls and firearms inside. A Colombian pipeline brings in cocaine of a purity that gives the operation an edge over everything else moving through Bed-Stuy. Bodies start dropping in the neighborhood around the same time. That is not a coincidence. When serious product moves into a neighborhood at serious volume, the men who were already there defending their corners do not step aside quietly. They fight. And the Mayos, because that is the family's name, fight back. By the time the 1980s give way to the 90s, and the crack era transforms Bed-Stuy into something even harder and more dangerous than it already was, the Mayo name is already known on these streets. Not famous, not notorious yet, but known. The kind of known that matters in a neighborhood where knowing a name can save your life or end it. This is where the story starts. One brownstone, one block, one family, and 50 years of American drug enforcement history that nobody managed to fully finish. Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, 1983. A brownstone on Stuyvesant Avenue, number 67, directly across the street, PS 81. A public elementary school. Children arriving every morning with backpacks, parents dropping them off on the sidewalk, teachers standing at the door. And on the other side of that street, according to federal investigators who would spend the next 2 decades watching, a drug operation was already running. Shift workers managing the flow, buyers approaching the stoop, waiting for a signal, stepping inside if cleared, crack and heroin moving through a brownstone while an elementary school sat close enough to see the front door. The family running it? Their last name was Mayo. Not a crew, not a gang, not an organization with a name chosen for intimidation. A family. Ronald, they called him Baby, the patriarch. His brothers, his sisters, his nieces, his nephews, and eventually their children. 3 generations of the same bloodline operating from the same block, the same neighborhood, the same street. By 2024, federal prosecutors would say that law enforcement had known this family's name for close to 50 years. It started here, on this block, across from this school. Bedford-Stuyvesant in the 1980s was already carrying decades of pressure. By 1950, black residents made up more than half the neighborhood's population. By 1960, 85%. The city's response to that demographic shift was to watch Bed-Stuy more closely than almost any other neighborhood in New York. More police, more stops, more presence that residents experienced not as protection, but as surveillance. By 2011, the 79th precinct alone would log more than 14,000 stop and frisks in a single year. 92% of those stops involved Black or Latino residents. Less than 4% of those stops led to an actual arrest. That is the neighborhood where Ronald Mayo was born, where he grew up, where he eventually built something on one block that federal investigators would say lasted for 2 decades before they could dismantle it. The brownstone at 67 Stuyvesant Avenue sits across from PS 81. It is not a back alley location. It is not hidden in an industrial zone or tucked behind abandoned buildings. It is on a residential block, in a neighborhood, across from a school. According to court documents, buyers knew where to go. They approached the stoop. They waited for a signal. If they were cleared, they stepped inside. Inside, shift workers managed the product. Crack and heroin were distributed on what authorities described as a rotating schedule. Pit bulls and firearms were used as part of the protection system. Ronald "Baby" Mayo was described as the patriarch, the man federal authorities alleged had pulled siblings into the business. Then he watched that second layer pull another generation, a niece, a nephew, children who grew up watching and eventually participated in something that had been running since before some of them were born. His childhood friend Alan Covington had been managing the house since the late 1980s. That is nearly 15 years of continuous operation at a single address before federal investigators even opened their file. The product did not come from a local supplier. According to court documentation, Ronald Mayo's cocaine pipeline ran through a trafficker named Raul Palmer, who connected him to a Colombian supplier known as Don Bernardino. Shipments moved from Colombia through the Dominican Republic into Florida and then north into Brooklyn. From that brownstone on Stuyvesant Avenue, the product spread outward, smaller markets in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, as far as Kentucky. But Brooklyn was always the main ground. Federal investigators estimated the operation brought in approximately $40,000 a month at its peak. Not the biggest number in the history of Brooklyn drug trafficking, but sustained, consistent, operational across decades in ways that most organizations never achieve. The Colombian connection gave the Mayos access to supply that many Brooklyn operations simply could not match. The family structure gave them something equally valuable: people who did not talk. Because the first rule that made 67 Stuyvesant Avenue function for as long as it did was not the product or the pipeline. It was that the people inside were family. You don't flip on your mother. You don't testify against your brother. You don't put your sister in a federal courtroom to make a deal for yourself. The family structure was the security system. Around July of 2003, federal investigators began closing in. Discreet undercover buys came first. Then wiretaps. Then 18 months of recordings that kept tracing everything back to the same Stuyvesant Avenue address. What they heard confirmed what they had suspected. In January 2005, Operation Hold the Mayo. Ronald Mayo, James Mayo, Willie Mayo, Magdalena Mayo, Brenda Mayo, Denise Mayo, Angelina Mayo, Isha Mayo, John Mayo, Raheem Mayo. 2 generations, 10 family members, arrested in a single sweep. From Ronald's residence at 777 Green Avenue, cocaine and cash were seized. From the Stuyvesant Avenue brownstone, more cocaine, more cash, and a semi-automatic pistol were recovered. In excess of 150 kilograms of cocaine were accounted for during the investigation period alone. Federal prosecutors called it a victory. The neighborhood watched the Mayos get taken away and assumed that was the end of the name. It was not even the end of the decade. While the federal case against the older Mayos was still working its way through the courts, something was already building. Rakim Mayo, known as Bo, was 19 years old. According to federal charges filed in 2008, Bo Mayo and his childhood partner Gregory Brown, known as G-Baby and also 19, were running a cocaine and heroin operation that extended from Brooklyn into Blair County, Pennsylvania. Think about what that means. The 2005 takedown had put the older generation in federal custody. Their children, teenagers, had watched it happen. And instead of stepping back from the name and the history, they expanded it. The Pennsylvania operation ran from 2003 and intensified through 2006. The structure was sophisticated. Buyers in Pennsylvania called one of two cell phone numbers. New York suppliers relayed the order. Local distributors passed it to runners. Couriers carried the product to meeting spots. Money was wired directly back to New York City. Confidential informants made 17 controlled purchases for federal investigators. 5 search warrants were executed, 1,967 bags of heroin, 196 bags of cocaine, $2,700 in cash. Distribution materials. Between June of 2006 and December of 2007, authorities estimated the operation generated approximately $2 million in 18 months by 2 teenagers from Brooklyn. G-Baby never made it to sentencing. He was murdered in a high-profile shooting in Queens, a location where the rapper Fabulous was also present. His death made headlines across New York. Bo Mayo went to prison. He served over a decade. October 1st, 2014. Near Pulaski Street and Stuyvesant Avenue in Bed-Stuy, only a short walk from 67 Stuyvesant Avenue where it all started, 2 Mayo family members are playing chess on the street. William Mayo, 57 years old. Can Mayo, 16 years old. A man named Cush Rydell approaches them and opens fire. 9 shots are fired. William is hit, Can is hit, and a 61-year-old bystander named Judith Daniels is caught in the crossfire. Demetrius Mayo, 28 years old, gets into his car. He follows Rydell and rams the car. Rydell is arrested. 2 years later, he is convicted and sentenced to 25 years in prison for attempted murder, assault, weapons possession, and reckless endangerment. 22 days after that chess game shooting, Demetrius Mayo, the man who had chased down and rammed the attacker, is shot dead inside a nail salon on Myrtle Avenue in Bushwick. An argument inside a nail salon. The man who sought justice for his family members was dead before the year was out. Kenneth Bryant was eventually sentenced to 18 years to life for Demetrius Mayo's murder. The cycle that had been turning since the early 1980s was still turning. The criminal history is documented. The court records are real. 10 family members were arrested in a single sweep. A second generation ran operations in Pennsylvania at 19. A third generation posted cash on Instagram before the next arrest. But here is what the headlines never put next to those records. 2013. New York City was at the height of the most controversial stop and frisk era in its history. A federal judge ruled that a stop and frisk involving the patriarch's own son, Ronald Baumel Jr., was illegal. The gun recovered in that stop was suppressed. The stop itself was unlawful. Separately, Kareem was arrested in 2001 for the murder of a man named Reuben Scrub. He was convicted on the testimony of a single eyewitness, a man who told the court he could see clearly at distance, who said he did not need glasses for far away. Investigators later discovered that his ex-wife said he wore eyeglasses all the time. His DMV records confirmed he struggled to see things far away. The only witness who placed Kareem at the scene could not see the scene clearly. Kareem spent 23 years in prison for a murder he said he did not commit. In January of 2023, his conviction was vacated. He was 48 years old. His parents had both died while he was inside. 9 grandchildren were born while he sat in a cell. The family filed an $80 million wrongful conviction lawsuit against the city, from a family that law enforcement had been treating as a criminal organization since before some of those grandchildren's parents were born. The same last name that made guilt easy to assume also carried a wrongful conviction, an illegal stop. A federal judge ruled that constitutional rights had been violated in the pursuit of a name law enforcement had been hunting for decades. Both things are true simultaneously. The criminal history is real. The wrongful conviction is real. That is this family. Not simple, not one thing, never just one thing. Mayo came home from prison. He had served over a decade. He was in his 30s. He had children. He had a name that carried half a century of Brooklyn history behind it. He posted a video on Instagram. He stood in his kitchen, making breakfast for his children. On the counter, there were stacks of cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars in the kitchen, on the stove, in the refrigerator. He filmed himself counting it, narrating it, talking about how the Mayos get money, how the name means something, how nobody in Brooklyn had more influence at his age. Federal prosecutors would later say that by 2024, when Mayo was arrested again at age 35 on fentanyl conspiracy charges in Peekskill, the Mayo family had been known to law enforcement for close to 50 years. 50 years. From the brownstone on Stuyvesant Avenue to a Peekskill narcotics conspiracy. From Ronald Baby Mayo to his nephew Bo. From the crack era to the fentanyl crisis. Same name, different product, different generation, same block. Here is what 50 years of the Mayo family history actually tells you. It tells you about a neighborhood that the city decided to watch more closely than it protected. It tells you about a drug trade that continued across 3 generations because the economic conditions that created it in the early 1980s were never fundamentally addressed. It tells you about a family that law enforcement built an entire mythology around. A mythology that made every subsequent Mayo arrest feel like confirmation of something already decided. And it tells you about the cost of that mythology. 23 years of Kareem Mayo's life, an illegal stop and frisk of Ronald Mayo Jr., an $80 million lawsuit against a city that had been hunting the same last name since before Mayo was born. The Mayo family of Brooklyn is not a simple story about criminals getting what they deserved. It is a story about what 50 years looks like when a name becomes a target, when a family becomes a case file, when the same block, 67 Stuyvesant Avenue, becomes the center of a story that 3 generations never fully escaped. Operation Hold the Mayo. The government thought it was a punchline. For the people inside that brownstone, it was their whole life. Subscribe to Bloody Reports. There are 1,000 stories in this city that nobody has told the right way yet. This was one of them.